Well, there it is, right out of the gate. The Fantasy Football Today league standings. And number one, undefeated, most points in the league, Robert Turbin, 2-0. Heath, where are we? I mean, look at this, 1-1. We're barely hanging on. If the playoffs start today, we're not even qualifying. This is awful. Awful, awful, awful. I mean, we got a lot of work to do, so I'm glad we're going to talk about fantasy football today. Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. I'm Jamie Eisenberg, right near the bottom of the standings. That's Heath Cummings, right with me at the bottom of the standings. Joining us is Robert Turbin, 2-0, undefeated. Robert, you said before we started you're a little concerned about your team. I'd like to be that concerned about my team as well, sitting at the top of the standings.
I don't feel all that strong. There's still some reinforcements that need to be made, fellas, okay? We're 2-0. It's great, all right? But it's still early in the season. Long way to go.
Yep, he's obviously been coached up about how to speak to the media. So Robert doing a good job there with the politically correct answer about not getting too far ahead with the 2-0 start. But we're going to make sure we at least challenge him a little bit at some point during the season. Saquon Barkley, who you regretted taking in the first round, getting you off to that good start. All right, let's talk about some of the big topics here again on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Thank you for spending some time with us a little bit earlier today than normal. We had some big news happen this week. Big news going to continue to happen as we know all the injuries that are occurring throughout the NFL through the first 2 weeks this season. And in Kansas City, they added a new running back. So Isiah Pacheco is going to miss 6 to 8 weeks with the broken leg. They signed Kareem Hunt to the practice squad. We know Carson Steele, Samaje Perine, they've been with the team. So Heath, I'll start with you. How are you telling fantasy managers to approach the Chiefs' backfield, especially if waivers are going to run on Wednesday night? Didn't have an opportunity to pick up any of these guys just yet.
Yeah, I'm looking at it as if Carson Steele's available, maybe go spend 15% of your fab on Carson Steele, maybe 5% on Samaje Perine, whatever. Like if you got a little bit left and you miss out on those guys and you pick up Kareem Hunt, that's okay. I think this is going to be more of a committee approach than we've seen. This was kind of the first year that seemed like Isiah Pacheco was going to be a full-time running back and handle all the short yardage work, the third down work. That's not going to happen with this group. Carson Steele is the early downs back. He's the short yardage back. Probably going to touch the ball 15 times a game. Samaje Perine is going to handle most of the passing downs. And we'll see if Kareem Hunt's got anything left or not.
Robert, when you look at this situation, you know, Carson Steele, undrafted rookie free agent, had the fumble last week, but they went back to him in a key spot on a short yardage carry. Samaje Perine joining the team late in the process after getting released by Denver. Kareem Hunt knows Andy Reid, knows the system seemingly, but 29 years old, out of football until, you know, this move. What's your take on who's going to be the best Chiefs running back moving forward?
I think early on, it's Carson Steele. From a trustworthy standpoint, he's been there with the team throughout this season. You know he's going to get the early down production, so I would go with Carson Steele. Now, the big playability is going to come from Samaje Perine on third downs because that is the type of back he is, and that's where he's excelled over the course of his career. But make no mistake about it, Kareem Hunt, if he's healthy and he's in shape, this guy is a three-down type of back. And if he builds the trust with the Kansas City Chiefs, I believe he could surpass both Steele and Perine and start to get majority of the workload as long as he can prove he can do it.
I'll go back to what I said yesterday.
I would take him and maybe have him on the bench as a reserve.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, the best approach because right now he's not even active for the Chiefs. It could be a Dalvin Cook situation where they're leaving him on the practice squad for several weeks. The way that I explained it yesterday was it feels as if the Chiefs are trying to maybe get to Clyde Edwards-Helaire to see if he can come back and maybe be a factor in his backfield, and then from Clyde Edwards-Helaire get to Pacheco being back and making that Super Bowl push. So they're going to be in a discovery phase, and we're going to find out against the Falcons this week how they're going to operate with these guys. But I think the consensus is Steele and Perine for now, and then let's see what happens with Kareem Hunt moving forward. Dolphins unfortunately placing Tua Tagovailoa on injured reserve, a move I think that a lot of us expected after the concussion he suffered last Thursday against Buffalo. Robert, very scary situation. They're going to go with Skylar Thompson right now until at least week 8. We haven't spoken to you about the Tua situation. I'm sure you probably share the same sentiments. Everybody wants to make sure he's 100% healthy. But in terms of the football part of this, what does this mean for the Dolphins' offense, specifically the passing game, knowing that Skylar Thompson is not Tua and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle could suffer?
This is very concerning if you have Tyreek Hill, if you have Jalen Waddle, because you just don't know what type of production you're going to get from Skylar Thompson. The fact of the matter is he's not the same caliber quarterback as Tua is. And so that could lessen then the production that you get from the wide receiver position. But I think this is an opportunity now for the Dolphins to then lean more into their backfield. Devon Achane has had a nice start. Raheem Mostert is injured, but when he comes back, he may be more impactful for fantasy managers as well. So I'd be looking in that Miami Dolphins backfield if I'm a fantasy owner.
Heath, we saw this a couple years ago when Tua first started dealing with the concussions, that Tyreek Hill was still fine.
Right.
He wasn't the same elite, top tier number one wide receiver, but he was still top 10. Jalen Waddle was awful. Yeah. And I know, looking at your rankings, you still have Tyreek Hill 4th. He's 9th for me, so I'm a little bit more down on him, I think, than you are. Waddle, you said, though, is outside of your top 36. Is that correct?
I think it was 39th or 40th for me. And so, yeah, you said it. He was awful. I just think I can't sit Tyreek Hill. He needs one play, and Waddle does too, but Hill's more likely to get it. I think it's more likely that Thompson's going to really look at Tyreek Hill first, and if he's not there, we've seen over 1/4 of his passes go to running backs when Thompson's been on the field. So I think it's just that one read, dump it off to Achane if it's not there. This could be even better for Devon Achane in terms of a total number of targets. I'm not even considering for the next couple of weeks doing anything but starting Tyreek Hill, and I really hope I have a better option than Waddle.
All right, so hopefully Thompson can do 70% of Tua Tagovailoa, get the Dolphins to that bye week, and then week 8, and then we get Tua back healthy 100%. That's clearly what we're all hoping for. So for now, Skylar Thompson, downgrade for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. The Raiders are going to stick with Zamir White as their lead running back. That's according to Antonio Pierce. He sort of made this statement on Monday. I'll read you the quote. He said, "Our goal is to get 20-plus touches with him. It ain't Zamir. We got to start up front, man. The big boys up front got to block, bottom line." Heath, we know it's been tough for Zamir White. He was outplayed in week 1 by Alexander Mattison, who did most of his work in the passing game, 4 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown. Last week, Mattison also got a short area touchdown. Zamir White more involved in the passing game. Your concern level with Zamir White is what right now? Because it's a great matchup this week against the Panthers.
Yeah, right now it's probably like a 4 or a 5, and I'm probably just starting Zamir White as a number 2 running back because he's facing the Carolina Panthers. If he has another game where he averages 3 or 3.5 yards per carry against the Carolina defense, it's an 11. I will be absolutely just completely concerned, but I do think it's been a tough start to the year for the Raiders. The Chargers defense probably pretty good. The Ravens defense probably pretty good. The Panthers defense absolutely terrible. I'm starting White. I'm still viewing Mattison as kind of a touchdown-dependent flex.
Robert, you've seen situations like this. You've experienced them yourself, where slow start, offensive line not producing at the level, and Heath just said it, the tough matchups those first 2 games out of the gate. When you see a matchup like this and you're in the locker room, you say, okay, they couldn't stop J.K. Dobbins. They can't stop the run. Derrick Brown's not there. Are your eyes sort of lighten up a little bit and say, okay, now it's time to go eat?
Absolutely. But you have to take into account Carolina Panthers made some changes that could spark a team. So there's no guarantee Zamir White is going to have an excellent game against the Carolina Panthers. I'd be highly concerned if Zamir White is my RB1 or 2 on my team. If I could put him on the bench as 3 or 4, I'd rather have him in that spot as opposed to a starter, even though we're going up against the Carolina Panthers.
And Mattison, a good guy to keep on your bench as well, because as you said, Heath, if he struggles again, clearly Antonio Pierce answering questions about it, we could see Mattison taking on a bigger role. As we talked a lot this offseason, was Zamir White the next Alexander Mattison, the guy with a 4-game sample size of great production? Could it carry over to the following year? So far, not so good for White, but we'll see what he does in this matchup against the Panthers. All right, we got a game tomorrow night between the Patriots and the Jets, and not a huge deal in terms of a lot of fantasy options, but there are some key guys here. And I want to talk to you, Robert, about the backfield for New England, because Rhamondre Stevenson has been awesome so far. He's on your fantasy team, a big part of why you're 2-0. Antonio Gibson had 90 yards rushing last week. When you look at this backfield, week 1, Gibson was a little bit banged up. Is Stevenson going to continue to dominate touches? And how do you view these 2 guys moving forward, including in this game against the Jets?
Yeah, I think Stevenson is certainly going to continue to dominate touches because he's been the most consistent and trustworthy back for the Patriots, not only this season, but last season as well. Okay, he's been with the team for multiple years. Antonio Gibson, still fairly new, probably trying to find, his ground within this football team. But you know that this is going to be a run-first team. The running backs are going to be the highlight of this offense until Drake May and some of these other young receivers can come along down the road. So expect more high production from Rhamondre Stevenson.
We did see, Heath, another player for the Patriots emerge last week, and that was Hunter Henry. He had 8 catches, 109 yards, 12 targets. The week before, leading receiver for New England was Austin Hooper. And we know that Alex Van Pelt comes from the Kevin Stefanski system. They're going to lean on their tight ends, especially with a young and inexperienced receiving corps. Is Hunter Henry now, based on what we just saw and knowing the position, a must-start fantasy tight end?
I wouldn't call him a must-start tight end because we saw Isaiah Likely put up even more fantasy points than this in week 1, and then in week 2, he just kind of went by the wayside.
But they have other weapons in Baltimore.
Well, Austin Hooper was the leading wide receiver, or not wide receiver, pass catcher in week 1. Hooper is a top 12 tight end, or Henry is a top 12 tight end for me. I'm okay starting him, but if I drafted one of those top 8 or top 9 tight ends, I'm still starting those guys over Hunter Henry.
Okay, so we'll see if Henry can keep it going one more time. The Jets' defense is a little bit banged up. Pass rush has been non-existent from the guys we expected. There have been some other guys that have stepped up, but C.J. Mosley may not play in this game as well, so just some things to keep an eye on from the Jets' defensive perspective. Robert, one of the keys to your start so far, your 2-0 start, was you didn't see Garrett Wilson on the draft board. You took Saquon Barkley, and Wilson has gotten off to a slow start with some really tough matchups. He doesn't necessarily have an easy matchup this week against Christian Gonzalez, who's done a nice job so far for the Patriots. When you look at Garrett Wilson, primetime game, Aaron Rodgers, first home game since what happened to him last year. Is this going to be the night, tomorrow night, that Garrett Wilson starts to go off and look like a first-round pick, which many people, myself included, draft him to be?
I think it will be. I have him drafted in other leagues. I mean, I drafted him in the first round in other leagues, so I certainly thought the production was going to be there. Now, obviously, it hasn't shown up early, but this could be the game that it sparks for Garrett Wilson. I think the Jets have to be intentional about getting Garrett Wilson double-digit targets in this football game to try to help that production, and I think they will. So I think this is going to be a great breakout game for Garrett Wilson this season.
Well, let's hope so, Robert, because I can't regret just watching you pass on him and like, oh my God, I got a gift. And now he's been the gift that has not been giving week in, week out so far. Heath, the other guys for the Jets, we saw a big game 2 weeks ago from Allen Lazard. Last week, Braylon Allen stepped up. Aaron Rodgers could be somebody certainly in Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues. Anybody else you have any interest in this game against New England?
Rodgers only if you can start 2 quarterbacks. He's a kind of a middling QB2 for me. Allen Lazard is a touchdown-dependent flex. We're not too far from that wide receiver 40 range. I don't see a lot of difference this week between him and Jalen Waddle, which I never thought that I'd be saying that in their careers. And then Braylon Allen, a must roster, but you're not really ever going to know when to start him. It's just that if something happens to Breece Hall, Braylon Allen's probably a top 5 running back.
Must starts in this game are Rhamondre Stevenson, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, some other parts, maybe Hunter Henry could be in your lineups as well. You have a lot of questions about not just Thursday night, but clearly throughout the rest of week number 3. We're going to answer a lot of your tweets. Let's go to one right now before we take a break. And Matt wants to know pick 2, Juwan Jennings, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jordan Addison, and Brian Thomas, full PPR. So, Robert, which 2 of these guys are you going with? Jennings, Robinson, Addison, and Thomas?
Well, seeing as Addison is injured right now, we don't know his status. I'm going Brian Thomas Jr. and I'm going Juwan Jennings. Those would be my 2 choices there.
What do you think about Jennings with Debo hurt?
I expect that it's going to be a whole lot of George Kittle and a whole lot of Brandon Ayuk in the passing game. Jennings, I think, will be fine. I'd probably go with Wan'Dale Robinson just because he had that big target game in week 1. But listen, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel with these 2 starting options. Brian Thomas is the clear best option of that group.
Yeah, Brian Thomas. I would probably lean Jennings as well just to see what happens in that game for the 49ers. We have yet to see what Brock Purdy looks like without 2 of his 4 guys. So missing Christian McCaffrey, missing Debo Samuel. Hopefully Jennings, he had that 11 PPR point game in week 1. All right, this is Fantasy Football Today presented by BetMGM. We're going to take a break right now. We come back and get into some roster trends to help you with the moves that you made on Tuesday night, but also the moves you could be making on Wednesday. Most added, most dropped, most traded. That's next here on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Robert. We're taking a look at the roster trends from the moves you made on Tuesday night for CBSSports.com fantasy leagues, looking at the most added, most dropped, and most traded players. Remember, a lot of leagues run waivers on Wednesday as well, so this is something you can learn, maybe how much fab to still spend on some players, which players are going to be more popular than others, and we'll start with the most added list. And as you would expect, the Chiefs running back is going to be very popular after the Isiah Pacheco injury. So here are the list of players most added from Tuesday night. You got Carson Steele and Samaje Perine on the list. You also are going to see Quentin Johnston as part of the group of players that were most added. Some defenses, the Raiders were certainly very popular with their matchup against the Panthers, but there are other defenses you could target as well. But just really quickly, let's touch on the Chiefs situation again for anybody that missed the start of the show. Robert, just give us your take on Carson Steele, Samaje Perine, Kareem Hunt, who's on the practice squad, and who people should be targeting if they're still making waiver moves on Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, look, these are good moves and adds to your team. Steele is going to be that first and second down back that's going to get those carries early. Samaje Perine is going to be primarily, I think, your third down back and get a lot of opportunities in the passing game. And he can excel really well in that passing team, especially where the Kansas City Chiefs run a lot of running back screens. And Samaje Perine is excellent with those types of plays. So I like those adds to the team, and I think Kareem Hunt could be a sneaky guy that could really flourish, all right, after a couple weeks of being with the team. Quentin Johnston for the LA Chargers.
Well, we'll get to him in a second, Robert.
Okay,
I just want to go through the no, you're good. So you got Carson Steele and Kareem Hunt as two of the most added players on our roster trends list. Number 2 behind Carson Steele is Quentin Johnston. You also have Mike Gesicki, Derek Carr, and then the Raiders. Those are the top 5 players or fantasy units being the most added. Quentin Johnston, Robert, I guess since you're already on a roll, Heath, you could follow. But
I got excited.
Quentin Johnston, yeah, I mean, look, 6 targets, 5 catches, 51 yards, 2 touchdowns. What's not to get excited about? But is it a little bit of fool's gold because he gets the Steelers this week? Is he going to keep that up in a tougher matchup?
Well, it's going to be a tough matchup, but I think he's starting to become one of the primary targets within this LA Chargers offense. Remember, Coach Harbaugh talked about Quentin Johnston before the season and how much he liked him and how much he wanted him to be, sort of a prevalent part of this offensive scheme. So I don't think it's fool's gold at all. I would trust him. I'm putting him in one of my starting lineups in my league. I think he'll still do well against the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have a guy who's a former first-round pick, who's still just 23 years old, who's tied to a really good quarterback in Justin Herbert, and he has a game like this, everybody should run to the waiver wire and add him. And I'm not necessarily saying start him this week, but everybody should add him. And it's worth noting, like for the season now, he leads the team in target share. He leads the team in air yards. He's been a lot better on a per-route basis than Josh Palmer or Ladd McConkey. He might just be the team's number 1 wide receiver in the second half of the season. That could look pretty great. I just don't want to start him this week.
That's the thing, the second half of the season, right? Because this matchup is tough, I believe. Do you have their schedule in front of you?
I don't.
Their matchup, here, I got it. Their matchup, I believe, in week 5. Week 4 is also tough. So you got the Steelers this week, and then after the Steelers, you got to deal with Kansas City, which is not going to be easy. A bye in week 5, Patrick Surtain in week 6. So I think the only thing, which is why I say fool's gold, I hope fantasy managers that spending this fab on him get a disappointing game against the Steelers, drop him potentially going into their bye if he doesn't do anything against the Chiefs, and then you're picking him up when the time is right for him to have this big push in the second half of the season. So don't go crazy with the fab unless you're going to really commit to holding him on your roster.
Well, I just real quick, I think it's important, though, when you think about some of the wide receiver injuries that are happening right now, and you're looking for a player to supplement, some of those injuries. Jawan Jennings is a player that we spoke about and others. Quentin Johnston is certainly a player that I think, hey, if you need a starter this week because of injuries, I'd put him in there.
Yep, got to make sure Justin Herbert's right as well, dealing with that leg injury. Mike Gesicki was the most added tight end. Heath, when you look at his situation, how much of it is tied to T. Higgins? Because he did have a touchdown call back in week 1, had the huge game against Kansas City last week, and the Chiefs may be one of those teams that we're just playing all the tight ends against. But big game last week. But no T. Higgins. Higgins may return this week. It's a great matchup, though, against Washington on Monday night.
Yeah, I'm looking to add Gesicki right now. My expectations are really going to be lowered if T. Higgins comes back. But at the same time, it's the Washington Commanders, and they're not good at anything right now defensively. So he still might catch a touchdown pass even if T. Higgins comes back. And T. Higgins is not only just got to come back, he's got to play 4 quarters of football without re-aggravating that hamstring injury. So I'd view Gesicki as a low-end starter this week. And then if he does it again with Higgins on the field, we may have something more.
All right, let's go now to the most dropped players. I don't know if we have that list of the full list. I can read it if not. But Tua Tagovailoa is the most dropped player, understandably so. The Commanders' DST, Jeff Wilson, the Chargers' DST, Matthew Stafford among the most dropped players, Taysom Hill among the most dropped players, Tank Bigsby as well. We talked about Tua, and understandably, if you don't have an IR spot, probably going to have to drop him for another quarterback just to make sure you have a starter for your league. But Jeff Wilson's being dropped now. He's dealing with an oblique injury. Robert, we've seen Devon Achane step up. You mentioned earlier Raheem Mostert's banged up right now, and Jalen Wright's still a rookie. Just give us your take on the backup the running backs right now from Miami because Mostert, who knows if he plays, Wilson may not play. How do you view the guys behind Achane?
Well, I still think very highly of Raheem Mostert. I know he's banged up right now, but I still believe when healthy, when he returns, he's going to be a big part of that backfield. So if you have him on your roster, I wouldn't panic. I'd keep him on the bench or have him on IR, whatever you can do there as far as depending on what league you're in. But I like Raheem Mostert a lot, and I think Jalen Wright is going to be somebody to look out for in the second half of the season once he finds this tread on the tire. Jeff Wilson Jr., dropping him, I would probably leave him in free agency unless there's multiple injuries that happen in that Miami backfield.
Heath, when we look at the Saints, one of the best stories of the season so far, 2-0. Rashid Shaheed's been a monster. We know Chris Olave, the potential for him. Derek Carr's been the number 2 quarterback in fantasy, and Alvin Kamara, the number 1 running back in fantasy. Taysom Hill was expected to be a big part of this, and he's dealing with a chest injury. By all accounts, he's going to be fine. Are you dropping him, or would you hold him just to see what happens, knowing that there's probably another wrinkle or two that Clint Kubiak might have with Taysom Hill moving forward?
There may be another wrinkle or two, but I also think when you're so good at playing football the way the Saints are playing football right now, you don't need the gimmicks of Taysom Hill as much. It's hard, like you said this before, it's really hard to hold 2 tight ends. If you're not starting Taysom Hill, I don't really know that I care that much to have him on the bench. I'd be more likely to hold him in a non-PPR league, because even in a full PPR league, when he's good, he's a low-end starter because he doesn't really catch any passes.
Very touchdown dependent, as we know, so we'll see what happens with Taysom Hill. Hopefully he is okay and can help the Saints maybe move to 3-0. Big story, big surprise, but doing it without Taysom Hill, maybe Sean Payton was onto something. Maybe not. And we see the best of the other options stepping up moving forward. Let's take a look at the most traded players here. And no surprise with some of the guys at the top. You got Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey, the 2 most traded players as of Wednesday afternoon. J.K. Dobbins, probably people selling high there. Chris Olave, people buying low. Tony Pollard, Xavier Worthy as well. Let's talk about the 49ers situation here. So, Heath, you got McCaffrey still on IR. Who knows when he's going to return. Mason's been an absolute star. So I don't know if they're a package deal, like you're trading for both these guys, but are you looking to sell high on Jordan Mason right now, or are you looking to buy low on Christian McCaffrey right now?
I think if I'm making a trade, it's a situation where I'm trading for both. If I'm trading them away, it's probably a situation where I'm trading away both and getting just an enormous amount. Because if I only have Jordan Mason, I'm probably riding it out and see if I get 6 more weeks of RB1 production. I doubt I'm going to get that much from somebody else in trade right now. And as far as McCaffrey goes, I have to be at least 2-0, and I'd really feel better about it at 3-0 because you're going to have to give up a lot still to get Christian McCaffrey, and you're probably going to lose a couple of games while he's sitting in your IR slot.
Robert, how impressed have you been by Mason just filling this role? I know he hasn't done or doesn't do the same things that McCaffrey does in the passing game, but back-to-back over 100-yard games and just dominating from a running back perspective, running game perspective.
Very impressed. Very impressed. I've told you guys how difficult it is to go from being a backup running back to then being, the full-time starter where teams get to key on you, each and every week, keying on your strengths and your weaknesses. So to have the type of production that he's had, and the big question mark coming into the season was who was going to be the number 2 running back for the 49ers. Jordan Mason had an excellent preseason, and he certainly propelled himself into the regular season with the same type of production.
Robert, when you look at J.K. Dobbins, who's also on the most traded list, number 3 guy behind the 2 49ers guys, he's been amazing. 130 yards in each of his first 2 starts. Was fantastic last week against the Panthers, had the breakout game in week 1 against the Raiders. We know the injury history. He's missed 43 games in his career prior to 2024. Is it just now the time to sell high based on the injury history and knowing that it's probably unsustainable for him to keep this up?
Absolutely not. If you've got J.K. Dobbins, you keep him on your roster. I think you're going to have the production throughout the season. I understand the injury history has been there, and so that may be fearful for some fantasy managers, but not for me. Okay, I've got him in 3 out of 5 of my leagues, and he ain't going nowhere. All right, so I would put my trust in J.K. Dobbins and keep him on your roster.
Yeah, you'd like to be able to do that. I will say, the fact that he's still at, 45% of the running back rush attempts, I don't know that they want to unleash him. He's not going to keep averaging 9.8 yards per carry. It really depends on what you can get. If I can go get another top 12 running back, or if I get a top 12 wide receiver.
Well, let's marry the 2 guys that we were going to talk about. Would you trade J.K. Dobbins and Chris Olave?
I would rather have Chris Olave than J.K. Dobbins.
And you say no? Is that just the running back in you saying no, don't trade the running back?
No. I think that we, in fantasy, what happens is I think we underestimate the importance of having backs and depth at that position. Like Chris Olave's been great, but he hasn't been consistent.
Well, so
at least.
No, I think that this is because you're right. We do that, but I was looking at your FFT roster. Like I wanted to see what does the undefeated team look like, and you've got Rhamondre Stevenson sitting on your bench right now. You're running because you have J.K. Dobbins, and your running backs are so good. And you've got Terry McLaurin and somebody else that hasn't scored any points at wide receiver. Like, isn't that a place where you got to go trade one of those running backs to get a wide receiver?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. Because we just talked about it. J.K. Dobbins, injury history.
Right.
So if he goes down, guess what? I still have a top running back that I can replace him with. Although I haven't gotten the production from Terry McLaurin, Marvin Harrison came along this last week. Terry McLaurin, to me, is still wide receiver number 1 in Washington. I believe they'll find ways to get him to football eventually. That's how I feel with the other wide receivers that I have on my roster as well. So, I just think wide receivers, even though this year's an anomaly, a little less likely to get injured, be worried about trading your running backs.
I'm just looking up something here just to make sure. So you can find Robert on Twitter, on X, at RB Defender. That's RB Defender on Twitter. He will defend all the running backs and make sure he has them on his roster. All right, we're going to take a break right now. But before we do, let's answer one of your questions on Twitter or X. It's actually at Robert J. Turbin if you want to follow him. A great follow, by the way. Trading away Jamar Chase for Saquon Barkley. Only have Brandon Ayuk as a notable wide receiver if let Chase go. So would you rather have Heath moving forward, Jamar Chase or Saquon Barkley, knowing that if you give up Chase, you only have Ayuk as your last receiver?
Well, I'm afraid Robert's going to yell at me for this, but I would rather have Jamar Chase than Saquon Barkley rest of the season.
Yes, I agree. Do not do that trade. You keep Jamar Chase, please.
And keep it for this week, because as great as Barkley has been and should continue to be, Jamar Chase, after what happened in that game against the Chiefs, is going to obliterate that Washington secondary on Monday night. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back. Going to do a little running back roundtable. We're going to take a look at some backfields. Robert's going to give us his take on maybe who the best running back in some situations that are a little clouded is moving forward. You don't want to miss that after the break here on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Robert. We're taking a look at some running back situations that could be a little bit cloudy, and Robert's going to give us his take on who could be the best running back moving forward, or in the case of the first one, we're going to talk about with the Houston Texans, who could be the replacement option if Joe Mixon is out. So he hurt his ankle in that game against the Bears in week 2. Waiting to see if he's at practice today, but DeMeco Ryans, head coach of the Texans, said it could be day-to-day. They're hoping to have him back out there for this week 3 game against the Minnesota Vikings. So, Robert, if there is no Joe Mixon, they have Cam Akers. Dameon Pierce missed the game against the Bears as well, but he's there. Dario Ogunbowale. How do you see the backfield shaking out in Houston if Mixon can't go?
This is a really tough one because I believe Dameon Pierce has potential to make a little bit of a bounce back in fantasy, but I'm kind of leaning towards Cam Akers in this situation, particularly because of how he was so productive, all right, in the preseason this year. So Cam Akers, I think, if you can put him on your bench, would be a nice supplemental back, all right, to have in an emergency situation.
And you know we love revenge games. I think this counts as a revenge game.
He was part of the Vikings.
He was part of the Vikings for like 5.5 minutes. Yeah, I lean towards Cam Akers, but if Dameon Pierce comes back, it gets really messy, and I'm not going to rank any of these guys as top 30 running backs.
Akers was doing a nice job until he fumbled against the Bears, so that's something that could, be a problem for him. And Ogunbowale has just been one of those veterans that when he gets opportunities, he doesn't produce at a high level, but he does the things the coaches like, and so he could also have a role if, in fact, Mixon can't go. The best case scenario, though, would be Mixon out there, continuing his hot start that he's gotten through the first 2 weeks of the season. Let's go now to Tampa Bay, where Rachaad White looks like he's going to play, had a little bit of a minor groin injury, but he has not been running well, Robert. So far, 25 carries for 49 yards. Thankfully, he had the 6-catch, 75-yard game in week 1 against Washington. If he continues to struggle, and this is a great matchup against Denver, are we going to see more of Bucky Irving moving forward, the rookie for the Bucs?
I think that if Rachaad White struggles to stay healthy, we'll see more Bucky Irving. But as long as Rachaad White is healthy and good to go, I think he's still going to be the primary back, getting the primary targets and carries for this football team.
I definitely agree with the targets part. I don't think Bucky Irving's cutting into Rachaad White's work in the passing game. That's the one area, like as bad as he's been as a rusher the last year plus, he's been that good as a pass catcher. So Rachaad White holds on to those. I don't think Bucky Irving ever gets to a place where he's consistently taking a majority of the carries, but I wouldn't be that surprised if it turns into a 50-50 split in the running game.
Which would be awful. So this is a big week for Rachaad White again. Thankfully, seemingly healthy, but does need to take advantage of this Broncos defense that has struggled so far through the first 2 weeks against running backs. Let's go to Tennessee, where Tony Pollard seemingly establishing himself as the guy, Robert. We had a lot of questions coming into the season. Would it be Pollard? Would it be Spears? Would it be both? Spears is banged up a little bit, but expected to play this week against Green Bay. Is Tony Pollard now, in your mind, the best running back for the Titans?
I had no question about this from the start of the season that Tony Pollard was going to be RB1 for the Titans. He should be RB1 for some fantasy managers. This is how it's going to be as long as he's healthy throughout the season, no doubt.
100% agree. The only thing I'll add is don't drop Tyjae Spears. He has the type of profile that if this Titans offense has a good matchup or if they just get going a little bit, he could be successful with 10 touches a game with Tony Pollard getting 20. So make sure you hold on to Tyjae Spears, but start Tony Pollard.
Could be an absolute monster week for Pollard if Spears does not play. Packers, despite the fact that they won last week, did a great job against the Colts. Jonathan Taylor had a great game, didn't play in the fourth quarter, and we know Saquon Barkley had a 3-touchdown game in week 1, so Pollard could have another huge game as well. We got one more, or no, that's it? One more. Let's do the Dallas backfield. So we got the Dallas backfield here where Ezekiel Elliott, week 1, scored the touchdown. They were alternating snaps. Last week, Dowdle outplayed. Ezekiel Elliott played more snaps. So, Robert, this is a backfield a lot of fantasy managers are hoping somebody steps forward because we know the Dallas running back has been really good for fantasy the last several years. However, right now we got this crowded, unfortunate, no standout guy situation right now, taking on a tough matchup this week against the Saints. How do we feel about the Saints? Excuse me, taking on the
Ravens.
The Ravens this week, yeah. Man,
yeah.
How do we feel about Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle right now?
I mean, this one is really a toss-up, fellas. It really is, because you don't know which back is going to be more productive in 1 week or the other. Maybe Zeke has the slight edge this week against the Ravens just because he brings more of the physical approach, especially in red zone and goal line situations. He may be able to score a touchdown or 2 for you against the Ravens this week in those type situations. But overall, guys, a toss-up for these backs.
Yeah, this is one of those, like, it's a toss-up and it's completely gross. And you would probably feel better if you just didn't have them on your roster. I certainly don't want to start either one.
But who would you rather roster right now if you had to pick one?
If I had to roster one, I'd roster Zeke.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'd rather roster Dowdle just with the upside of what he can be, because I've seen Ezekiel Elliott just not do a lot. He did score in that week 1 game against Cleveland, but he's been miserable. Certainly was miserable last week against the Saints. So I'd take the upside of Dowdle, but I can understand if somebody wants to have Ezekiel Elliott on the roster. All right, you have questions, we have answers. We're going to have a mailbag coming up at the end of the show, but let's give you another question here to answer right now. So you got T. Higgins, Demarcus Robinson, Najee Harris, or Jerome Ford for the flex. So, Robert, assuming everybody's healthy, you got Higgins available, Robinson, Najee, and Jerome Ford in half PPR. Who are you playing?
I'm going with Higgins, no doubt. If Higgins is healthy, put him in there.
He is a Monday night game, though, so he's going to have to be a full go for me to put him in there. If he's questionable on Sunday, I'm playing Jerome Ford.
Yep, hopefully Ford does get a little bit more work. Was out-touched 15-8 by Deontay Foreman in the Week 2 game against Jacksonville. Great matchup for both the Browns running backs, though, as they take on the Giants in Week 3. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back. We're going to play everybody's favorite game, start, bench, cut. Going to give the guys 3 options. They got to say who's in their lineup, who's on their bench, and who they kick it to the curb. That's next on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. We're playing our favorite game, start, bench, cut. So we're going to tell you of the 3 players at the same position who should be in your lineup, who you want to have on your bench, and who you no longer want to roster in our imaginary game, because you're not going to have all these 3 players on the same fantasy team. Let's start with the quarterbacks here. We got Baker Mayfield, the number 1 quarterback in fantasy, Derek Carr, the number 2 quarterback in fantasy. We all had it ranked that way. And Dak Prescott, who's gotten off to a miserable start. So you got Mayfield against the Broncos, Carr against the Eagles, Prescott against the Ravens. Start, bench, cut, Heath Cummings.
I know what you're trying to get me to do here. I'm not going to do it. So I'm starting Baker Mayfield. He is a top 12 quarterback for me this week. I am benching Dak Prescott because I still believe he has more upside than anyone on this graphic, and I am cutting Derek Carr, and I hate it.
Robert?
I gotta agree. I gotta agree with Heath right here. This is exactly how I would roster my roster as well. If I had all three of these quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield would be my starter. I think he's been excellent this season. Dak, I still believe in as far as regular season production. All right, hasn't been there, but still believe in him. I don't trust Derek Carr, and so I would cut him in this situation.
You guys are crazy. I'm going week to week, and I'm going with the guy who's got the best matchup. And Derek Carr's got the best matchup. The Eagles stink defensively, and Carr right now is just playing great football. And so I'm going to start him this week to maximize my roster. Got him one spot ahead of Baker Mayfield in my rankings. I'm going to bench Baker. See ya, Dak. Shouldn't have paid you. And you're not going to be on my fantasy team right now. So Dak Prescott kicking him to the curb. Let's go now to the next one that we're looking at here. Three running backs. Got Jordan Mason, Zach Charbonnet, and Kyren Williams. And the theme for these three is two of the best replacement running backs right now and the best replacement running back last year in Kyren Williams. So Robert Turbin, start, bench, cut, Mason, Charbonnet, Williams.
Well, there's no doubt that I'm starting Jordan Mason because you know he's going to get the workload in that 49ers offense. With the injuries to Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in LA, I'm putting Kyren Williams on the bench. You know that the Rams are going to be intentional about getting him involved even more. Running backs aren't always that involved in the Seattle Seahawks offense, so therefore I'm going to cut Zach Charbonnet.
I'm definitely cutting Zach Charbonnet because Ken Walker's coming back in a week or two, and I don't need to keep Zach Charbonnet on my bench. I'm starting Kyren Williams. I think he's going to see a big increase in his target share, and I'm looking at my full PPR rankings right now, so that's why I'm saying this. I think we see more catches for Kyren Williams. I want to say all three of these running backs this week are top 12 running backs for me this week. So I'm not actually benching anyone, but I would bench Jordan Mason in this situation.
So if I was given my real answer, I would say I agree with you. I would actually start Jordan Mason and bench Kyren Williams and cut Charbonnet for the reason that you said. But Zach Charbonnet is my starter of the week. So I'm going Charbonnet as the starter because I think he's going to destroy this Dolphins defense, which has been absolutely abysmal against the run through the first 2 weeks. And they're shell-shocked and their defense is going to be on the field all day. I am going to cut Kyren Williams just for this particular week because you can't cut the 49ers running back. So Kyren Williams, unfortunately, you're out. Zach Charbonnet, you're the starter, and Jordan Mason, you're going to be the starter as well because I'm the rule maker and the judge. I get to do what I want with this game. All right, Jameson Williams, Rashid Shaheed, and Calvin Ridley, our trio of wide receivers here. So you got Williams, who's been on fire, Shaheed, who's been on fire, and Ridley's coming off a 2-touchdown game. So Heath, who you starting, who you benching, who you cutting?
So these guys are like 4 spots apart in my rankings this week. Good job. Calvin Ridley is the guy I'm starting. I believed in him coming into the year. I believe that he has the ability to be a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy football for the entire season. I'm starting him this week. Jameson Williams is going to the bench because he has that pedigree as well of someone who could be a must-start wide receiver. I love Rashid Shaheed, but apparently I hate the Saints in this game. I'm cutting Rashid Shaheed.
Robert?
I'm starting Jameson Williams. I love his upside. Calvin Ridley, I'll put him on the bench. Just not consistent enough for me. And that's the same reason why I'm cutting Rashid Shaheed as well. He just sparked to me, this year. He's going to be cutting. So I'm starting Jameson Williams. I'll put Calvin Ridley on the bench, and I'm cutting Rashid Shaheed.
I would agree with that. However, for this week, I do like Shaheed better than Ridley. I think Ridley's going to have a good game as well. But the way the Saints are playing, and just that Eagles defense is so bad right now, I think Shaheed keeps it going. Imagine if he gets more targets in a back-and-forth type of game where Derek Carr may be throwing 30 to 35 times. Rashid Shaheed could step up. And just keep in mind, we're talking about Jameson Williams. We're anticipating Amon-Ra St. Brown being healthy. If Amon-Ra St. Brown is out, clearly Jameson Williams is the easy starter of this trio. No question about it. All right, another trio of wide receivers. We got Drake London, George Pickens, and Mike Evans. London coming off a good game. Pickens and Evans coming off disappointing games. Robert, who you starting, who you benching, you cutting? London, Pickens, Evans.
I love my veterans, Jamie, okay? So I'm going with Mike Evans as my starter. Drake London has huge upside, so I'll put him on the bench. And I don't trust the Steelers' offense, so George Pickens is getting cut.
I'll tell you something, Robert. The only reason I think that Mike Evans is ahead of Drake London and George Pickens in these rankings consensus is because I have such a big gap between him and the other two guys. So I'm starting Mike Evans. I'm going to bench George Pickens, and I am going to cut Drake London. I think both Pickens and London are basically flip a coin on a week-to-week basis. They both have huge upside. They both have big question marks.
So I'm an ageist.
Yeah.
And Mike Evans, for this week, you're gone because you got Patrick Surtain. You got Patrick Surtain. It's going to be tough. I mean, you look what Surtain has done the first 2 weeks of the season. DK Metcalf obliterated him. George Pickens took him out of the game. We saw Evans struggle last week. Baker Mayfield went someplace else. Chris Godwin stepped up. I think we're going to see a similar type game plan. So, unfortunately, Mike Evans, you're out. I'm starting George Pickens because he did almost have a touchdown against Surtain. He was great in week 1. I know the volume's not going to be necessarily huge, but you talk about target share. We know he's going to lead the team in target share. And Drake London, I think we started to see the Falcons get going. So I'm starting Pickens. I'm benching London. And the old man, you can go to the retirement home in Mike Evans, and that's where you'll be at least for the foreseeable future. All right, let's take one of your questions before we get to our full mailbag. So again, keep those questions coming. I should have mentioned use the hashtag AskFFT. Trade situation here. Give Garrett Wilson, receive A.J. Brown. So Brown may miss week 3, still dealing with that hamstring injury. Heath, would you give Garrett Wilson to get A.J. Brown?
Yeah, as long as it's just a 1-week injury. I love this trade. We liked A.J. Brown more than Garrett Wilson before the season. Garrett Wilson's done nothing to change that. A+.
Robert?
Absolutely. Yep. This is a trade submitted yesterday. Get it done.
Yep.
Even if A.J. Brown has to miss 2 weeks. Be patient, get it done.
Yep, and some tough matchups already for Garrett Wilson, some tough matchups coming ahead for Garrett Wilson as well. He gets Patrick Surtain in week number 4. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back and get to all of your questions. Again, keep them coming to us on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Just use the hashtag AskFFT. That's next on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football presented by BetMGM. Got some time for your questions. Thank you for sending them to us using the hashtag AskFFT. Here we go. Devontae Adams, DeAndre Swift, or Travis Etienne, Jaden Reed. Which side of the trade do you prefer, Heath?
I will take the Etienne and Jaden Reed side. I am terrified that DeAndre Swift's just going to be an absolute nothing burger this year.
Big week for him, Robert, as he takes on the Colts. Which side of the trade do you like?
This is hard, man. This is really, really tough. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna take Travis Etienne and Jaden Reed in this trade right here.
Let's just hope Jordan Love comes back. I would agree. Etienne's the best player in this deal. Next question. Drop Bucky Irvin for Kareem Hunt or hold Irving in a half PPR league. Also, who's a better wide receiver start for this week? Demarcus Robinson, Alec Pierce, Juwan Jennings, Jerry Jeudy, or Darnell Mooney. So, Robert, I'll give you the running backs. Bucky or Kareem Hunt? Who would you rather have moving forward?
Keep Bucky, for sure.
All right, keep Bucky.
100%.
And then the wide receiver start, who do you like, Keith?
I will start Robinson.
I kind of like Jerry Jeudy against the Giants, but I'll make it simple. Go with Robinson as the new number 1 guy for the Rams. Next question. Trade Brian Thomas Jr. for Tank Dell. So here you go, Robert. One of these scenarios. You got running back depth, looking to get a wide receiver. Would you make this deal?
I would not. No.
I would rather have Tank Dell than Brian Thomas Jr.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was receivers. I thought it was Brian Robinson.
Oh, that's the receiver.
I screwed it up. Brian Thomas or Tank Dell? Who would you rather have?
Tank Dell.
Tank Dell. Yeah,
Tank
we're
Dell.
on agreement. Excuse me. Next question. Better rest of season, Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins, Heath?
It's Carr. I got to say something good about Derek Carr. Yes.
Robert, you agree?
No, Kirk Cousins.
Okay, wow. I would go Derek Carr right now, but I could see the upside for Cousins. All right, next question. When 0 RB in one of my leagues, I need to pick one of these as my running back 2 in a 12-team full PPR league. Jalen Warren, Tyjae Spears, Bucky Irvin, or Jaleel McLaughlin. Robert, who's your favorite guy?
I'm going with Jalen Warren in this situation.
I'll take Jalen Warren as well.
3 for 3, Jalen Warren. All right, last question. Well, that's it. We're done. Thank you for sending your questions. Thank you for watching. Make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. We will trash Robert's team over there because unfortunately he's killing us over here. But the Fantasy Football Today podcast, wherever podcasts are found, scan that QR code, dominate your fantasy leagues. Thanks for watching and good luck with your lineups on Thursday and Sunday as well. This has been Fantasy Football Today.